Hello, thank you for joining us again on Ask the Rabbi, where we have our famous Rabbi Friedman from Chabad of Coconut Grove.
Along with the famous Susan Miller.
Yeah, of course, right?
Well, we were
Sure.
just talking right before we went live about you getting noticed a lot more. So you are famous.
Yeah, it's really funny. Interesting.
Yeah.
Your family is good. Your
Everybody's
son
good, yeah.
went back to Israel
Mhm.
for yeshiva, and so, all right, everything's back to normal for you.
I guess you could say that. Things have been humming along.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So today's topic
Mhm.
is what to expect when walking into a synagogue. Now, when we're going to have our conversation, it's going to be an Orthodox synagogue, not a Reformed or conservative. There's a little difference. So we're only going to speak about Chabad and or an Orthodox Chabad synagogue.
Okay.
So let me tell you my experience. It was
Sure. Oh,
really
great.
funny.
Okay.
The first time I walked in, I couldn't get in. I couldn't find the front door.
Mhm.
I'm walking around outside, up and down, all around. Finally, somebody came out and got me and brought me in. And I
Wow.
felt so ridiculous.
Hmm.
So it didn't start off well for me. I didn't know what was going on. And all I did was sit and observe the first time. I followed everybody. When they stood up, I stood up. They sat down, I sat down, and I just watched and listened. So what I would like to do for the viewers
Mhm.
is talk about what to expect when they do walk in, Jew or non-Jew, it doesn't matter. And we'll go over some things. For example, let's talk about what to wear. What's an appropriate dress to wear for men and women?
Okay. So that's where you want to start.
Yeah.
About what the synagogue is, or
Whatever you want to.
we can
That
go.
was
we
my
can,
question.
We can start from what to wear, I guess. Okay.
Yeah, because that's, people want to fit in.
Mhm.
They don't want to walk in not dressed properly.
Right. Well, okay. So really, we should start with what the synagogue is, right?
Okay.
So synagogue is a house of prayer.
Mhm.
It is a place where the community gathers to pray together as a community. That's the function of a synagogue. So it's a place to come pray to God. And it's considered like the house of God. Synagogues are considered the mini temples. So the temple that stood in Jerusalem was God's house. Ki beisi beis tefillah, my house, the house of prayer. And so that's God's house, the house of prayer. And therefore, when we're coming to a synagogue, it's not just about meeting people or seeing people or being seen by people. There's that element for sure. But primarily, you're coming to a place, a house of God. You're coming to a place where you're going to pray to God. And so you should dress appropriately, right? So think about how you might dress if you're going to a very important business meeting or trying to make a good impression on somebody, or if you're going to meet a king or a queen or a dignitary or a very important business person or politician and so on. The way you might think about dressing to visit such a person would be the way to dress for God. Now, obviously, God sees us everywhere. God is everywhere. He's in our homes. He's everywhere. So you'd say, for God, I have to dress to impress him. So that might be true. But on the other hand, you want to dress in a way that reflects your mindfulness of where you're going and before whom you are standing and praying. And so that would be the rule of thumb, to dress like you're going to God, to speak to God. And it doesn't mean not dress like you're going to a wedding or in a tuxedo or in a gown, but it means to dress properly, formally, professionally.
Yeah.
Really. That would be an appropriate way to dress. Now, obviously, everybody's welcome in the synagogue. We welcome everybody, and regardless, really, of how they dress. But for the person coming in, since you asked, that would be an appropriate way to dress.
Okay, and so once we go into a synagogue, and my husband asked this question.
Okay, but we won't mention any names. Go ahead.
We won't mention any names.
Yeah.
And I just want the audience to know I am not Orthodox. I don't keep kosher.
This is not confession.
No, I know, but I want them to know where I'm coming from.
Okay.
And so I'm coming from a place of still questioning things that you take it, already, I don't necessarily know about. So when somebody walks in,
Mhm.
what is the protocol for entering into the sanctuary?
Okay. So something you have to know about Chabad synagogue, right, or an Orthodox
Okay.
synagogue, a traditional Jewish synagogue, would be that men and women sit separately. So that would be the first thing that you should be aware of coming in, is that the men and women sit separately. In some synagogues, you have maybe it's one floor, and you'll have a divider, a partition in the room somewhere where you'll have men on one side, women on the other. In our synagogue, Coconut Grove, we actually have a gallery. So women go upstairs, the men are downstairs. So that would be the first thing to know.
Now, why do they separate? Why is there separation?
The reason there's separation is because, as we mentioned, we come to the synagogue to pray to God. So on the one hand, we're praying communally, right? We want to get together and pray in community because there's power in numbers, right? And so there's a certain energy that is present when you're praying in a group. And the larger the group, the greater the energy, on the one hand. But on the other hand, prayer is very personal. And when you're standing before God, you're standing before God, and you should be focused solely on God and your prayers. When men and women mingle together, that makes it more of a social setting. So there's the notion of praying as a family. In Judaism, there's so much we do as a family. The family is the central focus of Judaism. The home is the most important place in Judaism. But there's a place for doing things as a family unit. Then there's a place for doing things that are between you and God, and eliminating those other distractions, meaning distractions in the context of prayer. So when you're praying to God, that's who you should be focused on. If you're sitting with your family, you should be focused on your family. And so that becomes a bit of a what's the word? A conflict of interest.
Oh, okay.
Right. And so therefore the men and women sit separately. There's also the element of social. That's just as far as family, but even socially, men and women mingling together, that causes distraction from focusing on praying. And in being in the synagogue, I mentioned before, it's like a mini temple. Well, in the temple, in times when it was full, the men and women were always separate. There were separate places for men and women because they came with a specific purpose, and so therefore that they were separate there. And our synagogues, which are sort of mini temples, we do the same thing.
Okay. What about we'll talk about the men's section just for a moment.
Oh, well, we wanted to finish about when you come into the synagogue. So the first thing was the men and women are separate. So there's a place for the men to go, a place for the women to go. And then when you come in, obviously you're dressed appropriately, hopefully, and to walk in respectfully. There's nothing to do when you come into a synagogue, but you're mindful of the place you're going into. You grab a prayer book. And then there's certain things that we do during prayer that might, depending on the prayer, maybe to add a prayer shawl, they should cover your head. For men, to cover their head, to wear a kippah. So most synagogues will have maybe depending on their clientele and their community, might have a tray or a bowl of kippahs, which are the head coverings for men to put on before they'd walk in. Usually most synagogues would have prayer books situated somewhere near the entrance, so you can come in and right away grab a prayer book, prayer shawls for men to wear if it's a service where there's going to be, where that would be required, and then find yourself a seat. So you have different synagogues where they have assigned seating, where people have purchase seats and have their set seats. So even for myself, no, we're not in Coconut Grove. We don't have that in our shul, in our synagogue. Shul, by the way, is the Yiddish word for synagogue. It actually, shul doesn't mean synagogue. Shul actually means school, actually, ashula. But we call it, at least the Ashkenazi European Jews call it a shul as well. So we're going back and forth.
But there's some men that don't wear shawls.
Right. Well, so but before that, just to point out, I mean, I've been praying in synagogues my whole life. It's part of my daily routine. And whenever I go into a new synagogue, when I hadn't been in before and I'm not familiar with the lay of the land, it's also, it's obvious, maybe not as intimidating and imposing to me as it is maybe to somebody who's walking in for the first time. But it's also, you want to know, what are the customs? Where are people sitting, standing? What's the vibe here? And so, just like any new place you'd come into, I think you sort of gauge that going in. But so like for me, a big one is, am I sitting in somebody's seat, right, when I walk in?
Right, right.
So in our synagogue, we don't have assigned seats, and the people that pray in our synagogues are very accommodating to people that might accidentally sit in a seat that they prefer to sit in.
Mhm.
But that would be something that you'd have to have whenever you go anywhere, really.
Okay. And for the men that don't wear shawls, why is that?
Well, why do men
Because
wear
if somebody
shawls?
walks in, some men do, some men don't. And I'm assuming for a moment that the ones that don't have a prayer shawl, don't know to put it on,
Right.
which is fine.
Right. So prayer doesn't require any extras, right? There are no props necessary for prayer. To pray is you and God and your heart, mainly. We have a prayer book, which is a text that articulates the desires and the needs and the prayers of our heart, which sounds kind of funny, but that's maybe another topic for another time, how that actually works. But that's really what the prayer book is a text to sort of communicate what's going on internally effectively before God. So that would be something you'd use. And then in the mornings, we pray 3 times a day. And so the morning service, there's some other things that we use as part of our prayer. So there's the prayer shawl, which we talked about. I think we addressed it. And I think we talked about the large prayer shawl and using it for prayer, right? So maybe we don't have to revisit that. People can go back and see that show. That would be something that you would wear, that men would wear during prayer. And then there is the phylacteries, the tefillin. I think we talked about those as well.
Talked about that, but
the
tefillin's not worn.
So tefillin, not on Shabbos and festivals, but
Shabbos
it's worn
is Saturday.
Saturday. It's worn during the week. So you'd wear, so in the morning service on a Tuesday, you'd come into the synagogue and the men would be wearing their prayer shawls as well as their phylacteries, those leather black boxes that they strap around their arms and on their heads. On Shabbos, on Saturday, or in festivals, they would just be in the prayer shawl without the phylacteries. So if somebody doesn't have one, there might be some available in the synagogue, but it's not critical to it's not an integral part of the prayer itself. It's just a few things that we do together to enhance the prayer. They sort of complement each other, but they're really sort of independent things. And so if you don't have one, you don't have one. Yeah. Okay. So, or if you're not sure how to wear one, hopefully you're in a synagogue where somebody might offer to help you put those things on. And if they're available, hopefully a person would.
And a new person, they always sit in the back to observe.
Depends on the person.
Yeah.
Saying new people as opposed to old people.
Well, that's not quite what I meant, but you know what I mean. Yeah, somebody it can be daunting.
Right.
And you can.
Yeah, by the way, that's a great strategy. The way you described coming into the synagogue for the first time and sitting inside just observing and taking it in, that's not a bad way to sort of come. Obviously, when you walk in, you want to feel comfortable. We make it really a priority that anybody who comes into the synagogue that we hadn't seen before, we make it a point to go over to them, to introduce ourselves, or to try and invite them in to make them feel more comfortable. But yeah, anytime you're in a new place, in a new setting, and certainly when that culture there's a bit of a culture shock, of course, there's going to be that element of being uncomfortable. We tried to mitigate that as much as possible. Yeah.
Right? Now, you had mentioned there are 2 prayer books, or 1 prayer book.
Yeah.
But then there are more than just one, because we've got the prayer book, and then we have the book when we read the Torah. So we've got 2 actually.
Right. And if you read Psalms, you can take a third one.
There's like books all over the place.
Books all over the place.
Right. So when one sits down, they can take the prayer book, and they can take also it's not the Torah, but it's you can follow.
Okay, so we're jumping around, and there are a bunch of different moving parts here. But you're talking specifically about the Saturday morning service, because like you mentioned about the prayer shawl, we talked about the phylacteries. Those are morning service things. Afternoon, evening service, a lot simpler, right? We don't have any of that. So there's no talis, there's no prayer shawl, there's no tefillin, the phylacteries. We don't wear those at the afternoon and evening services. So we're talking strictly morning service, and talking about taking out that second book, the Torah. That would be on days when we would read from the Torah. So typically, most standard prayer books today have. Back it up a second. We read the Torah three times a week. So we read from the Torah on Mondays, Thursdays, and on Saturdays, right? Mondays and Thursdays we read the morning service. On Saturdays we read in the morning service and the afternoon service. The Monday, Thursday, Saturday afternoon readings are very short. And so those are generally printed in the back of most standard prayer books. So if you come to the synagogue during the week, just take your one prayer book and you're good. On Saturday mornings, that's a much lengthier reading, and so it's hard to squeeze that. The prayer book would just be too big if we were to combine a prayer book plus the entire 5 books of Moses, right? That's the Torah we're talking about, the 5 books of Moses. That would make it too big. So that's in its own standalone volume or in individual volumes, depending on where you're going. So you would take that to read along. So during the morning service, there's a time when we take out the Torah scroll from the Ark, another feature of the synagogue, the Ark in the front, and we take out the Torah and we would read. So every year we read through the entire 5 books of Moses, starting from the beginning, from Genesis chapter 1, ending all the way at the end of Deuteronomy, right? So we read through all 5 books in order, week after week, starting from right after Rosh Hashanah, a few weeks after Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. It's a one section, it's multiple chapters, but one section, one reading every week, divided over the course of the year. So we go in order from the beginning to the end. And so that is done. That reading takes place every Saturday morning during the morning service. So when you come to the synagogue, you take out your prayer book, and if you come on time, if you don't come too late after the Torah reading, you take your Torah so you can follow along as well inside. And it's interesting that we read. So if you come to our synagogue, so all the prayers and all the readings happen in Hebrew. So the announcements and the instructions and the lecture or the sermon, the speech, all happens in English, and the interactions all in English, but the actual prayers are in Hebrew.
But they have English translation.
But they have English translation.
Right.
So a person can sit, and that's maybe going back to the first time you walk into a synagogue, you want to observe, get the lay of the land, and get a sense of what's going on. But really, our prayer books have English translation, and one is encouraged to read in English. So while the prayers are being led in Hebrew, and to the novice that have no idea what page number, we're constantly announcing page numbers. But I would encourage people to just read at their own pace, find something that speaks to them and resonates with them, and focus on that, not focus on what's happening really around them.
So, okay, that's new. What you just said. So if I'm doing my own prayers, and you're doing the Torah reading, I can still stick with my own.
Yes.
And I don't have to.
Correct.
Oh, very good.
But even so, like the one of the reasons that we read from the Torah every week, 3 times a week, is because it's our life force, and our life source, and so therefore we're constantly studying from it and always want to be mindful of it and to follow its directives and its instructions. So we're constantly studying it, and that's why we read it on Saturday morning. There's a much longer reading because people have nowhere to go. It's Saturday. It's not a work day, right? It's the Sabbath, and so we have more time. And so we should spend that time also studying Torah. So during the service, we dedicate a block of time to read from the Torah portion. But again, the point is to know and to understand what's going on. So that while the Torah is being read, it's in its original from a handwritten scroll, right? But if you're following along inside, it's time for a little study. So you can follow along even in the translation, or just read a little bit of the weekly Torah portion in the translation, so that you can also engage not just with prayer, but also with Torah study as well.
So if I'm lost, like if I'm trying to follow along, if I'm lost, I feel intimidated, and there's hesitation, is it okay to ask somebody next to you, like, what the heck is going on?
So I can answer that question very simply and say yes, but I'll get myself in trouble. We'll make it more complicated. So yes, of course, that's what you should do.
Yeah.
Hopefully the person next to you is also not there for the first time, and this is, can help, can guide you.
Yeah.
But the truth is, something interesting that happens in synagogues. So during the prayer, there are times in the prayer when we are focused on our prayers and we don't make any interruptions, right? So, well, I'm saying right as if, that's well known, but that's the case. So in the prayer, there are certain sections in the prayer where we don't interrupt. So we won't speak because we don't want to make any verbal interruptions and speak words other than the prayers that we're praying. Then there are, and so there are different degrees to which we won't interrupt during our prayers, depending on where we are in the prayer. The high point of the prayer is the Amida. I don't recall if we've spoken about that or not.
We've never spoken.
But that's a silent prayer that's recited standing with our feet together, and that's the high point of prayer, because that's the moment when we're sort of, even though all of prayer is standing before God, but that's sort of the intimate one-on-one,
where we ask for things.
Right.
Yeah.
Person with God directly one-on-one in private. and we don't make any interruptions during that prayer. It's such an intimate, powerful moment that there are no interruptions. So I get it mostly from my kids, sometimes from people that just don't know any better, that they will come up to me in the synagogue. I mean, in general, the synagogue, you want to pray, you want to focus on prayers, you don't want to have any casual conversation, but sometimes people just generally want to know, where are we holding, what's going on? But sometimes there are prayers in which you're just not going to respond, because those are those moments. So
people shouldn't.
Right. No. So
Could you imagine?
So listen,
Oh.
people don't know, and
Yeah.
you don't want to embarrass anybody, certainly. But if you ask somebody next to you and they ignore you, chances are they're probably at a point in their prayer where they don't want to make that interruption. So they're not rude, and they're not trying to turn you away, but maybe they're in that part of the prayer when we're focused and not making interruptions.
So
I always find my kids, for instance, know exactly when to come ask me for things or have
Always.
emergencies. Always during the Amida.
Always,
That's the
it.
time. So you see that?
I've seen it.
Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
That's how it goes.
So talk about the service and prayers. There's a certain structure to the prayers and the service. For example, at the beginning of the service, let's talk about on Saturday, on Shabbat. There's a beginning, middle, and end. Do you want to explain the different? There's like crescendo at the end, and then there's the Torah reading in the middle, and
I didn't know anybody even knows of the beginning of the prayers. People usually come in late.
I've been taking classes.
You've been taking classes. Well, I mean, I don't know if this is like the space for people. You come into a synagogue, we're trying to just give a sense of what's going on in the land. So maybe we can talk very broadly.
Yeah.
Because the prayers themselves, I mean, that's an in-depth, intricate study, detailed study to discuss them, the structure and the flow of the prayers. But the general ebb and flow of the prayer in the synagogue is that there are prayers that we recite standing because they're unique, and so we recite them standing. Most of the prayers, though, can be recited sitting. As I mentioned before, there's some prayers that we don't make any interruption while we're in the middle of those prayers. Then there are other prayers where you can make some interruption. So generally, you come into a synagogue, ideally, you should sit in your place with your prayer book, focus on your prayers, try not to focus so much on what's going on around you until you feel like you have a handle on what's going on and you can sort of keep up, because there are also in the prayers, there are some responsive parts in the prayers. So there's the leader of the prayers called the Chazan, who would be the leader. You can call him a cantor, but it's not necessarily a cantor, but the one who leads the service. The readings we do sort of communally, so it would be a little responsive, where the leader would say something and everybody would respond. So there's sometimes you hear people responding, sometimes you have a shouter in the crowd, and that can startle people, right? Somebody who's very enthusiastic, which is beautiful and great, obviously. To me, it's always great when it sounds sort of paradoxical in a sense, but to me, in a synagogue where there's noise is always, that means people are really focused on the prayer and they're zoned in, and so they're not being distracted by the noise of other people praying next to them. No, you're supposed to have proper prayer etiquette, which is not to be mindful of people praying next to you, and not to pray in some kind of a way that'll distract people from their own prayers, right? Either too loud or too demonstrative, and you want to pray in a proper way so that you kind of just can fit in with the crowd. But a little bit of noise and energy is great. So people respond to those prayers. So if you're not familiar, I wouldn't put too much pressure on oneself to try and keep up with that. You'll figure that out as you keep coming.
So something else I noticed says in the men's section, you and some other men wear all black. Well, you have a white shirt on, but they wear the black coat with the belt, the black belt, and it's a garment that you wear.
It's because we're black belts in karate.
Is that what it is?
I wish.
So I've noticed that some wear those garments and some don't.
Right. So people have different customs and different practices, different traditions. So me personally, if you ask me personally, when I pray, I would wear, even though I walk around in my kippah, my yarmulke that covers my head, but for prayer, I'd add an additional covering. I'd pray in a hat. Which is interesting. It's very different than a Western sort of sentiment where out of respect, you take off your hat. So, right, in Judaism, it's to show respect, you put on the hat, right? It's just more humility in a sense, right? I guess maybe playing on our sort of Western sensibilities, you take off the hat that shows that you're more comfortable, right? A little warmer, a little bit more open. But in a sense, when we pray, we want to portray the opposite in a sense, right? We're praying to God, so we want more humility, right? And so we wear a hat, cover our heads with an additional covering. When you're wearing a prayer shawl, you cover with a prayer shawl, and to wear a jacket, to wear a coat over your shirt, makes it more formal, right?
So you're saying the black?
Well, we didn't get to the black part yet, but to wear a hat and to wear a jacket, and then in addition to wear a belt, right? So not just a belt to keep your pants on, right? To keep your pants from falling, but an additional belt. So it's not one that is designed for any utilitarian purpose. It's not there to hold your pants up, or to just to be another ensemble piece of your wardrobe, but it's specifically a prayer belt. It's a belt that you put on for prayer, which symbolizes your preparedness and your readiness to enter into that space of prayer. It comes from the service of the priests in the temple, where when the priests would serve in the temple, one of the things that they would wear was a belt, a sash that they would wear, and the idea was that it was just one of those garments that you'd wear that symbolize your preparedness to serve God and to worship God. So, borrowing on that, we wear a belt as well during prayer. And Kabbalistically, mystically, it separates between the higher part of the body and the lower part of the body. And the idea is that when you're praying, you want to tap into those higher properties and qualities that one has, and sort of raise yourself above your more base animalistic inclinations.
Okay.
Right. So to rise a little higher. And that's really the idea of prayer, is really to rise a little higher. I mean, one of the ideas of prayer, right, is to pick yourself up a little bit from the everyday, from the mundane, and approach God.
And I bring the black.
Right. So the black is about humility. Why specifically black or dark, or more conservative sort of tones would be for humility. Again, we're standing before God. We don't want to come, flamboyantly and arrogantly. The clothes that we wear, the colors that we wear, send a certain signal, a certain message. So that's why, in general, I think the Hasidic Jews tend to wear more of those kinds of colors.
And I think a lot of people associate the black clothing with Hasidic, and they don't know why you wear that.
And why we do it even not in prayer.
Yes,
right? Because God is everywhere, and we're constantly trying to internalize the idea that we're always standing before God. So yes, there's a special urgency when it comes to prayer, and a certain formality comes to prayer. I don't walk around in a hat all day. I don't walk around in a sash all day. Some people actually do.
Yes,
as a matter of fact, there are some Chassidim that do that all day, and God bless them for that. But the point is that we're always carrying ourselves in a way that we're mindful of the fact that we're in the presence of God constantly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. If you bring your children, it's great. I know that our rabbi loves having kids there. It does something. I mean, when there's kids,
yeah, sure,
running around and
hopefully not running around.
Well, no, but there's
that balance, right? There's a balance, and again, we talked about this right in the beginning, I guess, about the proper behavior in the synagogue. So I tell my kids, and sometimes they listen to their kids, right, that you're in a house of God, and this is not a place you can't run around here. It's not a place to climb. It's not a place to make noise.
Sure.
To play. Well, but that's the balance, because you want to give your
children. I know
you want to give your children a sense that this is also their place, and they should be comfortable in a synagogue. And shushing them and grabbing them and tying them down, that's certainly not going to give them a good feeling. But on the other hand, you want to do it the other way, which is tell them this is a special place. It's a holy place. It's a special place. And then you have that balance of kids but certainly hearing kids in the synagogue and running around making the noise, that's signs of life.
So
and hope.
How long are the services?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Oh, isn't it? Yeah. And a lot of people just go, oh my God, it's so long. But I think Tommy, how long are church services like?
Well, like a Catholic mass is normally 30 minutes.
30 minutes. Oh, okay. Ours is what? A couple hours, I think, right?
So right now in our synagogue, the services start in the morning.
10:30.
They start in the morning, they end in the afternoon. It's about 2 hours.
2 hours.
About 2 hours.
And then afterwards we have lunch together. Kiddush, and we all get
Pre-COVID
together.
days. Well, hopefully that's coming back soon.
Yeah, I think it's coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be great. So let's see. Oh, some people stand, some people sit during services. Sometimes you see people in the corner saying some prayers. I mean, what's going on? Sometimes it gets very confusing for somebody.
Right.
So you're not sure what's really going on because everybody's at a different place. And this is where you were talking about some people, I mean, you can do it on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And also, we just want to keep people uncomfortable. We just have to keep people on their toes, right?
Right.
It helps with job security to just,
You're so funny. So there is where we take out the Torah. I'm just looking at my notes here. Yeah, if you take out the Torah, that's the Torah reading that you're talking about in the middle of the service. Some people show up at just the Torah reading and leave. And you can come and go as you please. You don't have to stay. We don't lock the doors for people, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fire marshal wouldn't allow it.
No. Okay. All right. But is there anything else you want to talk about?
I think people should come and they should see, they should sit, they should pray, they should hopefully be inspired. And
non-Jews as well, or
everybody is welcome.
Yeah.
And
because we do get people that are not Jewish.
People are curious. You come with an open mind and have that experience. But again, it's the idea is people often think you go to the synagogue and it's the rabbi who performs the service for you, right? It's the chazan or the cantor, the leader who sings everything for you and inspires you, or the rabbi's sermon that is supposed to move you. And really, you come to the synagogue to inspire yourself, to be inspired by each other, by community. So, I mean, there's a lot more to talk about the synagogue and the synagogue being a place of community. We didn't even touch any of that.
No.
But yeah, to come and to lose yourself in your connection with God and hopefully forget a little bit about the everyday, right? And it's one of the interesting things about prayer is that on the one hand, you want to ask for your needs, for the things that are weighing you down, that are weighing on you. And on the other hand, prayer has this capacity to raise you above the everyday and raise you above your problems or your needs. So it's a very powerful experience.
But somebody doesn't have to go to the synagogue to pray.
Absolutely. We pray all the time.
Right. Yeah. And we can also go to the synagogue to thank for gratefulness. You know how grateful we are.
Yes, absolutely.
That's to me much more important.
Yeah. And that's actually part of our prayers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was great. Do you like our sign?
Love our
Ask the
sign.
Rabbi.
ChabadMiami.com.
Yeah. They can email you or find out all the times and everything on your website.
Should be all there on the website. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week.